Hello, welcome back to Le Workshop. Bit of French there for you. You can probably hear it's still absolutely lashing it down in Devon. It's still really windy. I think we've still got a weather warning. It's just relentless and I'm getting a bit fed up with it. What can I do? Right, okay, so in this video we are going to service a very early pair of B&W DM4s. I've had a number of these here. I've also done videos on a few pairs. I think one of my own builds a few years ago, another pair that I refurbished, just a popular speaker, and I've had quite a lot of them, but never a pair this early. And I think certain things were changed and refined on later models because of the measurements I got. So we'll go through those in a minute. Yeah, also I want to go through what I consider a service to be for a loudspeaker. So, you know, if the speaker doesn't necessarily need work, but someone has sent them here because they want them testing out, making sure they're still functioning as they should, and just to check them out, because I have a lot of speakers that have been sent elsewhere to unnamed hi-fi shops to be tested because they weren't too sure whether they were working properly, and they've still had problems, so they've come here. And it's blatantly obvious that all these people have done is just plug them into an amplifier and played some music through them. I really don't feel you can be in the business of servicing, repairing speakers without being able to do measurements of some description. Sticking a multimeter across a driver, getting a DC resistance reading tells you nothing really, other than there's continuity through the voice coil. I had a pair of DM4s here which were collected last week, and I had to replace both mid-range drivers. This one has a perfect DC resistance, what you'd normally see on a DM44 mid, but the cone is lock solid. This one has a DC resistance which is about right, but no output. If you move the cone, you can hear a horrible clicking sound. So somewhere it's shorted enough to stop any output. That also leads me on to people on eBay that sell replacement second-hand drivers as matched pairs. They're not. You've just stuck a multimeter across them. You haven't done an impedance sweep. You haven't measured them in any way. And that's another thing. It seems every time I have a pair of DM4s on my channel, I start whinging. I don't get it. Anyway, so I'm going to go through what I do and what I consider a service to be. So yeah, anyway, let's have a look at these. So these are a nice condition early pair of DM4s, and in fact these have come from a guy called David who purchased a pair of my HA36s, which he's loving. I've had really good feedback from him. Yeah, he's been demoing them to his friends and family, which is nice, and I think they replaced these, which is, yeah, quite a tick in the box. So he's sent these to me for looking over. The veneer and finish on them is lovely. We've got a few little marks and nicks, but they're staying as they are. The covers are going to get reclothed, but beyond that, cosmetically, we are leaving them as they are. I may go over them with some hard wax just to tidy them up, but yeah, so covers are going to be reclothed. Covers on this early pair are fixed with Velcro. Cloth is filthy, so we're going to replace that. And what points to an early pair is the fact the woofer sits on the front of the baffle. It's not recessed like later pairs. Also, the front baffle is actually screwed, so you can remove it. Still the HF1300 and Cole Super Tweeter combination. I'm not too sure whether these are working properly. It looks like they've been checked by someone before. The early woofers have the white surround, so these are a Bextreme cone, and these can go a little tight. And these have, not so much this one. That cone moves pretty freely. This one, not so much. It doesn't take much just to clean that and supple up the rubber again with some conditioner. So yeah, when I was doing the measurements for these, I was playing low frequencies through them because I also like to listen, and their bass extension was very, very good. So yeah, so here's the measurements, and we'll have a chat about those. So what you probably noticed in those measurements is how peaked up the top of the HF1300's response is, and then how it drops off. So that is what naturally happens with the HF1300 anyway, hence the name. It gets to 13 kilohertz and drops off, and that's why it's such a good combination with a super tweeter that then carries that range on. I'm not too sure whether the early versions of the DM5 had an inductor on the crossover to roll the top of the HF1300 off, because it does peak up, and that's what I'm seeing here. And then I'm not really seeing the Cole Super Tweeter carry on. So something is amiss there. They both seem to be doing the same thing. So interesting. We will see. Otherwise, they're pretty similar. Off axis is pretty reasonable. These are the smiley face response. You know, the mid does dip down a bit, which tends to make a speaker unoffensive, non-shouty, that sort of thing. Doesn't mean to say you're losing clarity, you're just recessing the section of the frequency response that can be where harsh vocals and the upper sibilants and that sort of thing. So let's look inside them. We're going to take all the drivers out, individually test them. We're going to take the crossovers out, check all the components, and then if we need to do anything, fix it. If not, we've checked everything through. Service the woofer rubbers as well, give them a clean. We've got a lot of metal filings around on the drivers. So yeah, let's stop waffling and have a look inside. Whilst these early woofers suffer from tightness of the surrounds, the later woofers I found are a bit more delicate. They blow quite easily. Also, I've had a number of them where the magnet structure, the motor, the plates have come loose. I don't think they're glued very well, and they shift around and lock up the bobbin in the pole piece, which can be an issue. They can sort of be realigned. I've managed to do that, but it's quite difficult to do without damaging the voice coil. God. Oh my God. Okay, I've got a feeling the crossover is probably mounted on the back of this because there's no play on those wires at all. So let's put a couple of these bolts back in. See if we can take the whole thing off. Yep, okay. So, if I can carefully turn this round without doing any damage. There's our woofer with all of the foam that's wrapped around the back of the woofer. That's the case on later ones as well. It just disintegrates. Dreadful stuff. Gets in the woofer, causes all sorts of issues. Crossover, that's what you normally see on the later version, so we are rolling the top off because we have one of these inductors on the tweeter circuit. So something isn't right here. So we'll take a look. There's the inside. So on the earlier versions, they've also lined the cabinet with like this carpet underlay sort of stuff, which probably does add a bit of deadening to the actual cabinet itself, and then it's full of lamb's wool, sheep's wool, that sort of thing. And that's the same with later ones as well. Probably not to this extent, this is better. Other thing to watch is these metal pieces of angle aluminium become loose and rattle around. They're only nailed in. In fact, the early versions, by the looks of this, have 6 nails. The later ones have 4. So yeah, right, I'm going to try and hoover this out without hoovering the lamb's wool, and then we'll take a look at the baffle with all the drivers on it. I'm not worried about putting this face down and damaging our tweeter because we've got these standoffs. So I'm pretty sure I can probably bolt this woofer back in. I can do everything from the back, which is nice. Okay, so we've got quite a bit of corrosion on the back of the HF 1300. which isn't the end of the world. We'll obviously get that off as well. So let's quickly lift out the crossover. I find the capacitors on these hold up really, really well. Normally there's nothing to worry about or do. It's probably one of the reasons why these are a good second-hand buy, because the crossover uses decent capacitors, air core inductors, except for the woofer circuit. I think that's only a 1 millihenry. So replacing that with an air core is pretty straightforward. But because these are all polypropylene, they just hold up really well. So as long as all the drivers are working, you're in good stead. And yeah, these are a popular speaker on the second-hand market. If any of you watch Stereo Review X, watch Kelvin's channel. He's recently done a video on these. And yeah, they're good. They're not my favourite speaker. They use my favourite tweeter super tweeter combination, but I'm not a huge fan of this this woofer. Right, good. So I'm going to stick the camera on time lapse, desolder the drivers, test those, and then go through the crossover. Bit of a bugger because the components are glued in. All good fun. Right, interestingly, every component checks out. Capacitors are the right value, inductors are the right value, all is good. These are all glued down, all of them. I want to make it clear, removing these often breaks them. So I find that if you disconnect the drivers and you make 2 cuts on the circuit board, you can test each individual component. These are all copper traces which are tinned, so it's easy to bridge them back again with solder. If I need to put a link back in, I just use some copper. Whilst it might look a bit barbaric, it's the only way of doing it without wrecking the board, really. The inductor here is riveted in as well, plus you've got disconnection points if this was ever to be tested again. So crossover's fine. This is the 16 ohm variant of the HF1300, and normally you see 12 to 13 ohms as a DC resistance. We're seeing 10. So I'm going to check the other one, and then I'll impedance test these on DATs, and we'll see how they come up. Right, I've taken the other baffle off, and same issue with the woofer, all the foam had degraded. Look at that, 30th of January 1975. So what's that, 48, 49 years? Look at the corrosion on the HF 1300. That's really bad. So I'm going to go through the crossover on this one and then properly test these drivers. Yeah, so I've gone through all the components on the other one, absolutely perfect, but I found a lot of really dry looking joints, especially on the super tweeters. I've looked back at the other one as well, so I've reflowed them all. So we'll see what we get when we measure them again. Okay, so the purpose of the foam that's all around the woofer is to stop that wool falling in, but that degrades and causes an issue. When I was measuring these on the test tones, I was hearing a bit of rattling and distortion and stuff, so I expect it was stuff like that. I've looked back through the measurements, there isn't really any distortion there, so what I will do is put some new foam on this. All good. Right, there we go. So the DM4s have been checked over, serviced, and the covers reclothed. Yeah, interestingly, I didn't find a huge amount wrong with them. To explain that peak, I did find quite a few dry joints, especially on the super tweeters. I don't know whether they've been out and desoldered before, but yeah, having reflowed everything, they measure quite a bit better. It's been really difficult to do measurements today because it's been so windy and noisy, so the noise floor for the measurements was really high, and that can really colour the frequency response you get. So but all in all, they're better. I've looked back through measurements I've taken, because I've had quite a few of these, of earlier pairs, and actually they're pretty similar. So I've had a listen to them as well. Yeah, they're good. They're good. So yeah, here's the finished measurements. Like I say, they're not really representative because of all the noise and that when I was doing the measurements, but I needed to finish them today, so so that's it. So yeah, that's what I do when I service a speaker. Every component gets checked properly, and then if there's any repairs needed, I go back to the client, get the okay for the costs, and then crack on. I'd already spoke to David about what I found in the measurements, what I thought would be wrong. I had a ceiling for the repairs and we're well within that, so yeah, all good. A lovely pair of early DM4s, probably one of the earliest pairs I've ever had. So yeah, really good. Anyway, catch you on the next one.